Boom. We are officially going once, twice. We are officially live on the internets. What's up, Rayhan?
Dude,
Welcome
hello.
everybody to Notable Nation Getting Real, where we're tackling the big questions facing America. What the hell is going on? Tonight, we're going to tackle culture wars. What the hell is it? What does it mean for you? Why should we care? Yeah.
Okay, so
Wait.
culture wars. Are you trying to fix something?
No, it was just it was actually playing, streaming a little bit delayed over, so I was getting myself in my headphones. So here we go. Yeah, tell me what the hell does culture war mean to you?
Culture wars. Well, culture, that's that's kind of hard to define. That's like a set of.
No,
It's
culture war. What does culture war mean?
got to be a discrepancy between. I guess you could just put it against any type of community, whether it's racial, religious. Maybe it's a scientifically divided community. People tend to go into their own cultures where they have their own beliefs and ideas and set their own practices.
Right. So what I'm thinking is like culture war is a term that's thrown around as like something that's going on in America, right? And like Trump is somehow part of the culture war, and I guess other people are part of the culture war. So like specifically, what does that mean? Um, yeah, what the hell does that mean? What is the culture war that's going on? What are the who's fighting, and what are the lines?
Feels like a lot of people are fighting for something they don't even really know the whole when they don't even really know the whole gist of it. It feels like um the people that fight are attaching themselves to certain identities based on, I guess you could call it like a cultural separation. And this came forth due to um, just a lot of just a lot of new ideas being thrown around. I think it was, um, and Trump was like a symptom of those ideas of like rapid progression. And this could be in areas of race or gender or religion. Um, People in a fight for equal rights, I think people were trying to overcompensate. And then there was this reaction, and that's how Trump got elected. That's what it is to me. And then
In the fight for say that again.
the fight for equal rights, I would say.
Okay.
Equal rights between race, religion, gender. Um,
Right, because I mean I feel like I guess what I feel like is that um Trump and other folks like him would say everybody should have equal rights, right? And then there are other people who say, well, no, they shouldn't, because some people are, victimized or oppressed, or were born sort of behind, with we're dealt a different set of cards, so therefore we shouldn't have equal rights. We should have equity. We should have something else that sort of rights that wrong.
yeah.
Essentially, is that your understanding too?
Yeah, that's my idea of that overcompensation, where
Mm-hmm.
instead of getting people, instead of trying to treat people equally, you would have a thing where the people who you view as marginalized or victimized, you try to accommodate the part of society you see as privileged to that society that you see as being the victims. And I think the mindset that brings up is that these marginalized communities and these minorities are just an inconvenience for the people who are privileged. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong with that mindset, because you're just trying to accommodate the people who you see that already have all these rights to these people. But I think there's a better way to deal with it and give everyone equal opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So, like, on the who's fighting the other side of the culture war, and what would their like if we were to present an honest steelman like argument, what would that sound like?
Well, you mean like the left and the right, like
I
liberal?
don't know. Like, I mean, to be honest, I've heard the term cultural war, and it seems to me that there is some sort of like a difference in culture. Whether it's a war with like two factions that are fighting, or there's multiple factions, like is it like, and is it a war, or is it just a disagreement? Like, what is it? But I have heard that term cultural war quite a bit, and to be honest, I don't have a complete a very a solid understanding of what the hell it is. It does feel to me like there is some sort of um yeah, some sort of war being waged, with, you're supposed to have certain opinions, and if you don't have those specific opinions, then you're not welcome, right? Like,
Yeah.
it seems like, um yeah, that seems to be a thing. But
Hmm.
yeah, but well, I feel like there's probably some people that are really pushing the envelope on that, and then there's a lot of people who are honestly just afraid of being caught up in that. Like, oh shit, I don't want to be on the wrong side of this, so I better, show up and um, yeah, pretend like I believe something
They
when
pick a
I
side.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for their own survival, because now this culture war, the tools that people use to fight it isn't like artillery or ammo or infantry. It's more like it's not how you're manipulating people and weapons. It's how you're manipulating ideas and
Right.
science and truth,
It's
and how,
information for sure. Yeah.
yes, information. That's
Yeah.
what it goes down to, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
So how long has this culture war been going on?
I mean, you could say I think it's been going on. There's maybe since the 1800s, since the antebellum era
You
with
think?
slavery. Isn't that like around when Democrats and Republicans had to switch parties? I'm thinking that's when those parties started to really mold into their own identities and
Uh-huh.
beliefs.
Yeah.
So I think it started with that. And then there were movements like women's rights and then the civil rights era, which were good, but then people wanted to go further, who wanted to go further than that. I think they overcompensate. And
I think it's uh, I think it's more like the 60s, 60s,
60s.
maybe 70s. Because
Okay,
I feel
so
like, I mean, back then we have had slavery. I mean, yeah, and then that was, I feel like the world was like, the country was fairly united for a while. One of my favorite examples is just, New York 100 years ago, or 80, 90 years ago, and the building of the Empire State Building. And there's like all this progress. There's a really good documentary on PBS about the history of New York, and just fascinating stuff. What people were, the grit and the creativity and the innovation and the strength that people were displaying. Um, and the fact that they were able to build the World Trade, not the World Trade Center, the Empire State Building in 14 months, something that today would take years and years and years. I mean, it took them probably pretty much a decade to build the new World Trade Center, right? Freedom
yeah,
Tower. So, and that's something that it feels like we've lost, but it seems like the world was more united, and maybe it's something that happened after uh yeah, um the hippie generation, whatever that thing was.
yeah, I
Here,
know what
Glenn
you're
is
talking
joining
about.
us.
You're talking. Oh, hey, Glenn. Oh, they probably can't hear me connecting. Um,
Yeah. Hey, what's up,
but
Glenn?
Hi,
Hey there.
hello.
how's it going? I'm just working on getting my video on. Just a second.
Okay, so
Cool. We
Calvin,
want to
why do
hear
you
from,
think? Or you
yeah.
go first.
Go ahead, Rayhan.
I was gonna ask, why do you think it would take longer now? Is it because of the a barrage of these government regulations and just
I think that's a bit part of
bureaucratic
it.
barriers?
regulation is a huge part of it. I think also it's just we've lost touch with what we're capable of doing as human beings. We've lost faith in ourselves as people. We think that we're much weaker than we are. Like they would take these, what are they called? Nibs, is that what they call these? I think there's another word, but these like pieces of metal that they would heat up really hot, and then they would throw them at each other, like 80 stories up in the air. If you drop that thing, it's gonna mean big trouble for the people down under. But they didn't fucking drop them because they knew, they trusted themselves and each other, right? It's like that kind of stuff is fucking phenomenal. And these days we're too timid to even try. Or like believe that we can, and they would build these bonds as teams that would go up together, and they would know each other, and if one person is sick, they wouldn't go up because they build that trust between each other. And that's something that human beings are capable of doing, and you see that like at the top athlete level, right? If you look at, you've seen the Last Stands, that docu-series about Michael Jordan and the Bulls, like they were clearly capable of something amazing there, but it's sort of relegated to that sphere. We don't really allow ourselves to do it on a day-to-day basis more broadly.
Yeah, and the thing is with people, we are in an era where we have more ability to, in terms of physical performance. People are breaking world records almost every year. Like
Right.
half a century ago, it was regarded impossible to run a
Right.
4-minute mile, I think, and now high schoolers can do that.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And people do it, right? It's just we look at that in awe, and we're like, oh my God, these people are so amazing, like, athletes, or, maybe like top performers of some sort, right? But we don't realize that we're not taught that we all have that ability. We're not pushed, we're not stretched, we're not encouraged, challenged to grow into that, so we forget it.
yeah.
Glenn, welcome.
Hello, how's it going?
From you. Yeah, it's going fantastic, man. We're, as you know, live on streaming on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
So thanks for showing up for this. We're talking about culture wars, and we're trying to figure out what the hell are they. Like, we hear about culture wars. Who's fighting? How many fronts are there in this culture war? Who are the generals? Who's fighting it? How does it impact us day to day? Do you have a good answer? Do you know?
So my perspective on it is I'm kind of, I was raised in suburbia, and I'm continuing kind of to live in suburbia. I moved from Chicago to Minneapolis after graduating from college, and I think that I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it too. I've heard some people saying that there is a culture war, and even some people saying that there isn't one, and that it's been kind of something that has been hyped up recently as sort of a result of some different shifting demographics and some different shifting perspectives.
Okay.
I think that there is definitely a cultural difference in our society. There's definitely a large gap between, especially like urban and rural areas of our country. But when I talk to people,
like the coasts and flyover country.
yeah, you've got sort of and the coasts are kind of urban generally too, right? So you have these big cities, New York, Chicago, even like Minneapolis is pretty urban, and then you have the countryside surrounding it. You have the areas where people are in very small towns, very isolated communities where they're very insular. They talk to each other mostly. They all know each other. Versus in these urban areas, I know a lot of people in urban areas, but as far as like who my neighbors are, sometimes it's a little hard to reach out. It's almost as sometimes feels like the urban areas are also isolating in their own way. And it's
very much.
I feel like sometimes it's hard to, when these urban areas and these rural areas see each other, they see so many differences. But I also see a lot of similarities. I think that most people want the same things, and at the end of the day, and that a lot of the political differences that arise in our society are really just kind of different perspectives, and they're off of those base desires for our communities and our societies. I think at the end of the day, most people just want to, be let be and go home to a happy family and friends, and have everybody be safe. And I think that that's something that I
So
think we
what's the
can all
culture
fall back
war?
on. The culture war, that's a good question, right? I think the culture war recently has been a lot of that. It's been a lot of that rhetoric of pitting urban and rural areas against each other in different ways, right? So you get a lot of stuff talking about how there's differences in these urban and rural communities. Like, you have our president who talks a lot about the Democrat cities. He paints them in a very bad light. He talks about how um, the urban areas, with all of these protests that were happening over the summer, he talked about how Black Lives Matter is going to come into the suburbs and wreck everything. And that's, in my view, stoking a culture war. It's really sort of trying to amplify that idea that there is a culture war, when maybe there is and maybe there isn't. Maybe there are differences that need to be thought about there, but it's really something that is, I think the war part of it is very inflammatory. I think that it could be recontextualized in a way that would really de-escalate things, because that's ultimately what we want. If there is a culture war, we want to de-escalate it. We want to solve those differences. We want to find the common ground, and we want to resolve certain things. And I think that,
Well, I think some people
yeah,
want to, and other people don't, obviously.
I sure hope that most people don't want to, right? I sure hope most people want that sort of thing to simmer down. They want to try and resolve differences in a way that's constructive, right?
Yeah.
And
that's what we're here to do.
And there's a lot of different issues that I feel I have seen that people in rural areas don't understand the issues in urban areas, and people in urban areas don't understand the issues in rural areas. And so
let me just take a moment, because
I
actually went and on Wikipedia and looked up what it says about culture war. Mm-hmm. So it says, a culture war is a cultural conflict between social groups and the struggle for dominance of their values, beliefs, and practices. So dominance of certain values, beliefs, and practices over others. It commonly refers to topics on which there is general societal disagreement and polarization in societal values is seen. Okay. The term is commonly used to describe contemporary politics in the United States, mm-hmm. with issues such as abortion, homosexuality, transgender rights, pornography, multiculturalism, racial viewpoints, and other cultural conflicts based on values, morality, and lifestyle, which are described as the major political cleavage. So I think that's, yeah. Would you buy into that?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that there are contentious issues in our country, for sure, and that a lot of those issues fall along party lines in specific ways. I think that list is pretty accurate. I think some of those have gone in certain ways more than others. Mm-hmm. Some of those, I think, are probably a little more hyped up than the reality of it really is. Mm-hmm. But that's, of course, just my perspective, right?
So it seems to me that like for a lot of them, right, it's the polarization happens because mm-hmm. like people take extreme positions because they think the other side takes extreme positions, right? Like, I mean, take abortion, for example. There are definitely people who are like, no abortion under any circumstance because of God or religion or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think the vast majority of those people also understand and respect that not everybody feels that way, and that they can't necessarily legislate that that's how it's going to be for everybody, right?
Sure.
So there's I think the vast majority of them are open to some sort of compromise, but because there is this like hard line, no abortion, not even with rape, like they always bring out the rape example, right? Like, then I feel like the other side is like, well, you know, I grew up in a country where abortion was famously legalized back in the 70s. I believe shortly after I was born, which is, I know I don't think I would have been aborted anyway, but you know, it's only up to the first trimester, right? Only up to 12 weeks, and then it's done. It's illegal after that, right? Whereas, which I think is a reasonable compromise, right? Like that seems, if you're going to do abortion, like I would say no further than 12 weeks. That would just be my take personally. But then like there are people on the other side who are like, no. You like abortion all the way up to birth and like even beyond maybe or something. Or maybe just that's just a myth, right? It seems to me like it would be possible to find some common ground or even just say, look, it's a state by state issue. Let the states decide what they want to do. And then if you disagree with the laws in that state, you can move to another state that has a different set of laws, right? It seems to me that it should be possible to find some sort of middle ground in there. And you can still respect and say, hey, in my view, it's immoral to have any abortions at all. And like, in my view, it's immoral to have any restrictions on abortions at all. But let's find a place in the middle where we can both be sort of happy, unhappy.
Yeah. And that place is going to have to be arranged because a lot of this abortion debate is trying to find that distinction between a clump of cells and conscious life. And that's very hard because life isn't black and then white. It's more like
right. I mean, this is life from the beginning, right? I mean, clearly it is. There's cells dividing, and it's some form of life.
I guess
right?
you'd just call it like just consciousness.
Right. Actually,
Right.
in my opinion, it doesn't matter. The distinction is irrelevant as to when life starts. It's really more so about. This is. I feel like talking about that specific issue is a little bit. It gets off the topic exactly of. Okay, so how does this relate to the culture war? Right.
Right. So my point wasn't to talk about abortion, but more
Right.
to generalize out and say what I feel like is happening is that you know each side is sort of straw manning the other side, saying, "Oh, you just want to kill babies after they're born, and you don't give a crap about anything." And the other's like, "Oh, you don't even want to allow abortion under any circumstances, not even rape, right?" And then it's like, and then the people who are pro-abortion are scared that they're going to take abortion away from them completely, and so they go even further out that way. And the people who are scared that like everybody's going to go like fuck each other and then abort all the time, that they go even hardline in that direction, right? And so because of that straw manning of each other's, the demonizing of the other side, it gets harder to meet somewhere and respect differences.
Are you saying that it's almost as though like straw manning the other side makes those straw men a reality in some way, or is it more so like, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much I believe that idea that seeing the other side go extreme makes you also go extreme, right? Like I don't see Nazis and fascists and say, wow, those guys are so bad. I'm going to go full communist anarchy, no government at all, completely. Because those people are so extreme, therefore I have to be extreme on the other end. I see it more so as okay, those people are extreme. I'm going to ignore them because they're extreme, and I'm going to find what the middle ground is instead and try to, find where a real middle ground is rather than a middle ground between the middle and like fascists. And that actually has to do with, I think possibly this topic might relate into the culture wars, the Overton window, which is sort of a viewpoint of where the political discussion is at. It's sort of like if you start normalizing more extreme viewpoints, those extremes come into the norm, and then even further extremes start to get less extreme. And it's sort of like a thermometer as to the political ideology as a general measure, right?
Yeah. And why do those extremes become normalized? Because a majority of the population starts to believe it.
Well,
I guess, but
is
in
that
this
a
case,
chicken or the egg?
I'm not sure how that
sorry.
this like if we're looking at abortion as an example, right? Like what are the extremes about beyond no abortions ever under any circumstances? I don't see how you go more extreme than that in that direction.
You could have harsher punishments, right? You could have harsher punishments for people who get abortions. You could have it so that any woman who gets an abortion, that's death penalty, right?
All right. Yeah,
You could,
I've not heard anyone say
right,
anything
exactly.
like that.
You wouldn't, right? But
And then
maybe
the
if the
other way would
Overton
be like,
window
I'm sure
were
there's
to
some people that
allow
believe.
abortions all the way up to age 50 or something, right?
well,
That would be kind of
that's a
extreme
pretty
in that
broad
direction.
definition of abortion, but I don't
Yeah, I
know.
mean, I don't know either. Like,
I
no, but
mean,
that's what I'm saying. I do
yeah.
think that the straw manning sort of makes the straw man real. Yeah, like like the way that you put that. I do think that happens. Yeah.
I have to
Okay.
agree with that because I've sort of seen that in myself when I'd say when I was in middle school. This was with the election of Trump. I didn't really know that much about politics, but when I saw people spouting so much about how great he was, I automatically just went on the other side. And I was like, no, he's terrible. But now I have like a more nuanced viewpoint of that. And it's like, yeah, he is terrible in some ways, but he's also helpful in other ways. So I think it's you talk about steel manning, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Instead of straw manning, we should still. Do you think that's like a valid solution to the potential culture wars we're having right now?
I would say to some extent, yeah. I mean, obviously, I think in my opinion, when I'm talking to someone about the opinions that they have, I want to get the best picture of their opinions, right? I want to get the most good faith um, version of what they're trying to tell me. I don't want to obfuscate what they're telling me because I want the truth, right? I want to hear what they have to say, and I want to hear that what they have to say makes sense, right? Because if someone's saying something that doesn't make sense, that's immediately kind of like a yellow flag to me. I'm like, okay, what you're saying doesn't make sense, but I want to make it make sense because clearly it makes sense to you. So you should be able to communicate it to me in a way that makes sense to me as well, right? And even if I find I disagree with them for a number of different reasons, at least I am disagreeing with the best version of their opinion as possible, right?
Right.
And you
And
could be
I think is absolutely critical to get anywhere. I will also say that there's a lot of people that don't know why they believe what they believe, and it might not make sense, right? And once you
Yeah.
start questioning and asking questions, you might find that no, it doesn't make any sense, and they might realize that too, or they might sense it and then resist and back away, right? Because they don't want to be caught realizing that whatever they believe doesn't make fucking sense.
yeah. That's a sort of ego death they would have to go through.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like when your beliefs are challenged, that gives people a very visceral reaction. It feels like a visceral reaction, right? If you've
Mhm.
ever had your beliefs challenged by someone who's talking to you, it physically feels bad, right? You
Mhm.
get a biological like fight or flight reaction to
Mhm.
that because to have your beliefs challenged is to challenge your whole idea of the world in some ways and
Mhm.
your body whether you want it to or not tries its best to resist that and so you can't just and this is the thing if you want to convince people that your ideas are better than theirs you don't have to just prove that their ideas are bad you have to show them how your ideas are good and are actually like a better worldview to have. You don't just need to deconstruct their worldview. You need to build them a new one. Of course, you want to build them a worldview in a way where they feel like they have built one themselves and you do that with yourself as well, right? Whenever you go over your own ideas you're almost rebuilding your own worldview over and over and over again and reinforcing it.
okay. So keeping them secure, even if they have to let go of this idea they've held on to so long, they still have a structure they can find safety in
Yeah,
a worldview that you build for them.
in some
So
ways.
returning to the culture war, when, like, where does it come from and what's fueling it, and what needs to, is there going to be a winner, or is there going to be some sort of resolution? Like, what's the path here?
I pretty sure, well, emotion is probably fueling it. Information combined with emotion. So deceitful media that um doesn't make it objective.
Right. And I think that, like, mentioning media, right? Like, I think it's obvious that um, people are making money off of the culture war, right? You get, the more polarized it is, and then you get the one team and the other team, and then it gets tribal. And I'm sure that a lot of the those independent media outlets on the right, the Dan Bonginos and Ben Shapiro's and Rubin Report, maybe like of the world, that they make a lot of profit off of the culture war, right? Like that, off of just being part of that, and exposing the idiocy and the stupidity on the other side to their tribe, and being like, these people are crazy and that kind of stuff. I mean, it pays the bills, right? It pays the bills. So they might in some ways be part of the solution, in that they're having the conversation, and maybe they are reaching out to some people and trying to like find some common ground and stuff. But at the same time, it pays the rent, right? And I'm assuming similarly on like the some of the major news networks, and on Twitter personalities and whatnot, right? Just when there's controversy and when there's polarization, it draws attention.
I feel like it's definitely rare if they're trying to find common ground. It's mostly they're just trying to get themselves to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of. It's definitely. I really don't see a lot of media organizations necessarily trying to find common ground. I'm not, at least not any of them that I have seen. Actually, one thing that I've done recently as far as media goes is I've stopped watching a lot of media, and I really just read it. When you read media, I find it at least a little easier to kind of weed out the bias and sort of almost put my own tone onto it, from how I interpret it, and that kind of.
What are you reading?
I read a lot of different. I have like a Google feed, I guess, which is kind of, I try to moderate the algorithms, but I read a lot of different news articles from. I mean, I guess I'm on the left a little more, so I get biased towards the left a little bit. But I've read some stuff from the New York Post occasionally. I've read some stuff from the Guardian. I read some stuff from CNN. I read some stuff from MSNBC. And even if they are biased, and even if I know they're biased, I'm at least able to try and determine, okay, what are the facts that are being said here?
Yeah.
I remember
it's one of the things that bothers me the most, because like I like Tucker Carlson, I like Ben Shapiro, I like Dave Rubin, I like some of those folks. But what really bothers me is when they take something that someone on the other side said, and they clearly and obviously misconstrue it to make their point, right? I'm like, dude, that's I'm just stop doing that. Just stop.
Yeah.
Like, try to give a charitable interpretation of what the guys. There's plenty of douchebaggery out there to choose from, right? But if you're choosing as an example something that's very questionable, like where I think what he meant was something else, and I actually understand. I feel like I understand what you probably meant, and you're misconstruing it. I'm like, dude, that's just not cool.
Yeah.
So if we can't really fix how the media presents information because they profit out of it, then I guess the other option would be to make viewers try to turn away from it, or try to see it as part of their worldview and not like the screen that's in front of them the whole time, not their like main input of information. And
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I guess a lot of those media personalities, Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson, they don't just sell you information. They sell you kind of an affect of that information as well. And even CNN and on the left, there's a lot of this as well, where they're not just telling you the information, they're selling you an idea as well behind that information.
Yeah.
propaganda.
Yeah, it is
right?
a little bit propaganda,
Yeah.
There's some news organizations that are a little more propagandistic than others, and from obviously because I'm more on the left, my opinion on that's going to be a little skewed. I definitely am not a huge fan of Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin, but when reading anything, I try to look at what the facts are what's supported by evidence, and then determine, okay, what conclusions are they drawing with this evidence, and do those conclusions make sense, or are there leaps of logic that seem to come out of nowhere? That's something
Right.
that I try to do sometimes.
Is there any time
That's
you've done
cool.
that where that led to a change in your belief?
Yeah, there's occasions where that's the thing, is changing your beliefs isn't gonna happen all right at once. I've had, certain ideas about certain things, and then I've been presented with evidence to the contrary, and I sort of take a few days or take some time to read that evidence and to sort of construct my worldview in a way. And sometimes I come back with the same worldview, except it's a little bit different evidence, and I'm like, okay, just because this evidence says one thing, it doesn't change my worldview necessarily, because here's some logical conclusions that you can draw from that, or et cetera, et cetera. But
So
other times,
I would love to hear, Glenn, let's dive into one of the topics, like, abortion, homosexuality, transgender rights, pornography, multiculturalism, racial viewpoints. Those are the ones that are mentioned. Any of those that you're like, let's try to dig into that a little bit more.
We were just talking about gender, but
oh yeah, Rihanna and I had a nice long discussion about gender roles and a lot of those ideas on the Discord server.
All right, cool.
And that was very productive,
Talk to
I
me.
thought.
Yeah,
we're like 148
so
messages. No damn.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
We were talking a lot about
yeah, what's your view there? So
I was talking about how I think that gender roles are unnecessarily restrictive in our society, that even that those ideas about what men and women ought to do, not necessarily not necessarily generalizations about them, but what we perceive men and women should do, those ideas are unnecessarily restrictive. And what we should be doing about, people who don't fit those norms is just kind of letting them be. For instance, I think there's a lot of stigma against men doing things that are considered feminine, a lot of sort of negative stigma on those people. And I think that we would be better off without that negative stigma. And I took up the position of abolishing gender roles entirely. I guess abolishing is kind of a strong word for that, because it sort of implies policy changes, but it's not about policy changes. We don't want to force anyone to think or, yeah, it's about the idea.
So if it's like what I'm hearing you saying is some people have certain ideas about like what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, or like how men should be or women should be. Like, I mean, what the hell are we going to do about that? People are going to have opinions about all kinds of shit, right? Like, so
of course.
What is there really to do?
What there is to do is to put the idea into people's heads that what women should and shouldn't do is really up to them. It's up to that person.
Right. And and who should put that idea into people's heads, and like why? I mean, and what does this have to do with men and women at all? What does that have to do with gender at all?
It has to do with individual freedoms within our society. Basically, what we want to do is we want to increase the amount of individual liberties that people feel like they have, right? If you feel pressured
wait. We want to the amount of individual freedom that people feel like they have.
Yes. So to
me, that's now where like that's a slippery slope, right? Because people feel all kinds of crazy shit.
That's true.
All the fucking time.
And
we have zero control over it.
So it is that is sort of strong. I guess maybe I should go and look at some of the stuff that I was actually saying, because maybe I put it into better words there. But like we were talking about it within some of the context of mental health as well, where if someone is assigned a gender at birth, if they are born
assigned a gender,
yes. So this is an idea within sort of how transgender stuff works, right? Because that's the thing, is these gender abolition ideas are pretty prevalent in the LGBT community. They're prevalent among people who are transgender, who feel as though they are not the gender that their biology is, right? Although there's a lot of different science that's coming out about this. A lot of this is breaking. And full disclosure, I'm not a trans person. So a lot of the stuff I say here isn't from my experience. It's from stuff that I've heard from other people. Basically, someone feels as though they are not the gender that maybe their genitalia would say that they are, or that, you know, the rest of their body would say that they are. They feel as though maybe a man feels as though they are a woman instead, and they want to identify with female pronouns. They want to dress up like a woman. They want to take hormones that would start to change them into a woman, and they want to get surgery to change the way that their body looks. And if they don't do those things, a lot of those people experience what's called gender dysphoria. So they feel depressed, they feel awful, they have mental health issues because they have a lot of cognitive dissonance because they see their body and feel like it's not their body. I think that's a pretty decent description of that.
So what's your take on it is
my take on those things is that people who experience those are often told like those experiences aren't real. They're often denied transition. They're often told, they're often misgendered, sometimes on purpose, to be malicious to them. They're bullied for trying to transition, for trying to express their gender identity in the way that they want to. And those things are a result of traditional gender roles, right? They're a result of our ideas about what men and women should and shouldn't do. And so if we can educate people and show them how, hey, these are people who maybe don't fit into the traditional ideas of gender roles, and we should accept them. We should let them be who they want to be and accept the decisions that they're making for themselves.
Right. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of accepting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Accept people how they are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're of legal age and you have the means to transition, all power to you, do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like it's anyone else's responsibility to necessarily pay for it or to play along.
Well, sure.
Like, you know, it's your choice what you want to do, right? And yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Go for it. I am worried, you know, I'm concerned that a lot of people are very confused about it, right? Like that you're a boy that for some reason, like basically you think you're a girl, but what's really going on is that you're really pissed at your dad, right? Like something like that. I don't feel like we understand this nearly well enough to like go in like on a massive scale and say, yeah, go transition everybody. Like, I think there's way too many red flags here that we want to get society involved in doing that on any kind of grand scale.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Calvin, I personally disagree. I think there's actually a lot of research that's been happening lately about gender dysphoria as
But do we know what happens 20 years
issue.
later, 30 years later, 40 years later?
People have transitioned in that time period. You know, there have been people who have been transitioning for decades, you know.
Right. And
even
I've seen lots of studies of people who've transitioned and really regretted it, and they're in large numbers, right?
So we see both of you guys are looking at your own studies that go completely against each other.
Well, that's the thing is,
My concern is that we really don't know enough about this, and it's a more recent idea that's really taken root, and like again, the way I see it is, you know, I see more social stigma against men acting very masculine than against men acting very feminine, right? A man acting aggressively, you know, with pride, with confidence, like really powerfully standing up and setting boundaries and stuff. People are like, oh, too much, right? Sexual, right? But a man is like vulnerable and emotional and can show his soft side and his feminine side, everybody's like, yay, good boy, right? So I mean, I see
Well,
kind
and
of the
another
reverse
thing,
stigma.
I see, I understand what you're saying, but I've also seen that like that's the thing is like that's about defining masculinity, right? And defining what masculinity should be. And I think the reason that people are praising that second thing that you said, men being vulnerable and men being more open about their emotions, is because that's something that has been suppressed in masculinity up until more recently, or at least like that's a thing that traditional gender roles said men shouldn't do, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a masculine thing to do. But that once again gets into our definitions of what it means to be masculine and feminine. And that's what abolishing gender roles wants to do. Is, you know, it's on your side. It's on your side there, where it wants to get rid of the stigma of what men and women should or shouldn't do. And so men being aggressive and taking control and in a good way that is constructive to them, and being assertive and self-confident, we want those traits to be good for whoever does them, right? Regardless of whether it's a man or woman.
Okay, so what I'm seeing is that there's a need to kind of deconstruct society's expectations of something. And well, that's a very hard thing to do. But to
Yeah.
also know that the thing you're doing that is going against their expectations is a naturally healthy thing that's actually good for you. And
Mhm.
part of that is why society's expectations is against that. And that's why I'm also on the side where we need to be more iffy about transgender because when it comes to new things like that, like transgender was something new that just appeared very recently, like in the 70s, right? I don't think
No, there's been like, if you go back through history, a lot of the times you can see it's in a little bit different language, but people have known about transgender people for a long time.
people
We've
have okay.
It's even in like Greek mythology, where they kind of got the sense that some people sometimes they have the body of a man, but they express themselves like a woman would. This is
That
something that we've
just
known
or is
about
that
for a
just
long time. Hmm?
being feminine?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, to Rayhan's point, I mean, it's definitely something that's gotten a lot more attention in the past decade or so, right?
Certainly. Than at
And
least in
so to
recent
become a,
history. Yeah.
right.
And then
Um,
my
so,
fear is that overcompensation.
yeah. And I feel like, I mean, in general, I feel like as a society, we know so little about the human body, about the human psyche. Like, I mean, just the way that our entire healthcare system works is, you know, biochemistry versus like really understanding the mind body connection, really understanding, you know, the connection between thoughts and emotions and your body and diseases and all that stuff. The entire history of Chinese medicine, where they've clearly figured some things out that we're not really incorporating. I feel like there's a lot that we don't understand about the world as a society. So that's part of what makes me skeptical
Mhm.
of something like this. Is I really don't think that we understand the consequences and the origins of this. I do think that it is, in the vast majority of cases, it's a band-aid and not a very good one. And I'm not, I think our understanding of what actually brings us happiness as human beings is very flawed, right? Like we think
Well,
that,
right.
you know,
So
Netflix and, you know, getting drunk on the weekends and, you know, just like satisfying our pleasures or our immediate desires, that somehow brings happiness. It does not, right? We kind of know that, but we completely ignore it as a society.
Okay. Yeah. So where I was going with that transgender is something really new. This is the kind of basic philosophy under that.
mhm.
Whenever we're very iffy on a topic, when there's not much science behind it, my philosophy is always to move towards security, to where there's order, so you can have those established roles or things that we follow instead of going the opposite direction, which could have gravely unintended consequences. Because at least with ordered roles, you know the consequences of that because we've seen that throughout history. So
Yeah.
when it gets iffy, that's where I'm at. Now on transgender, I think the science is there's been a lot of science that has shown that transgender identity is based on structural differences that happen in the brain. If someone has male genitalia and organs, so they're sexually male, but because of prenatal hormones or some other exposures to hormones or chemicals, body processes, they get a brain structure that's more alike to the other sex, and these people are much more likely to express themselves as transgender. So I agree that people after a legal age should be able to transition, but as
And they
children,
are, right?
I've also seen that a majority of kids who want to be the other gender, who express some types of gender dysphoria, a majority of them, I think it was like between 60 and 80%, by the time they're like 16 or 17, they end up re- reverting back. And a lot of them just end up being homosexual or something, but they don't go full trans.
Well, yeah, and that the whole thing with honestly, I don't feel very qualified to talk on anything that's happening to people who are underage. That's an even more contentious issue that I personally don't feel comfortable getting into because it's so there's a lot of ideas there that honestly I don't have my mind made up about. But definitely, I think that the it's for me it's not a question of is the science there or do we know what the unintended consequences are. It's a question of bodily autonomy, right? And it is a question of education in that science and in that research of do these people know what they're getting into, do they know that there possibly will be unintended consequences, and if those people know that they're fully educated on the procedures that are about to be done to them, shouldn't they be able to do those anyway? I mean, it's their body, and their body, their choice is sort of my
They are
position
allowed,
on
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, we all agree on
So,
that. I
so
think the only,
there's not really anything there.
But
only
I'm curious, Calvin, as to what you are skeptical about then. Is it skeptical about to the point where maybe you would like what other measures would you want to put in place to sort of I don't know if that's really the right question to ask, but
Yeah, I mean, I would be wary about encouraging transitioning. Like if that ends if is the choice that people end up making, I think that's cool. I don't want to make it hip or cool to be like, oh yeah, I'm trans to get attention and then transition and then like
that's
right.
and that's
and
had
then like
bad
you go through all that shit and like you regret it after and it like it ends up being terrible. I would hate to see that happen.
Right.
If people do that, that's their choice, right? But
Mhm.
I definitely don't want to encourage it in people who are underage. I
okay.
don't think it's something that should be other people should be forced to pay for through taxes or insurances.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and it's I think that would be sort of the limits I would put on it.
Yeah.
So
And I think right now, generally, transitioning it's not like I think I'm a girl and so I'm going to go get the surgery, right? There's a lot of steps that people who are trans take in the intermediate steps of, questioning their gender, questioning their identity, experimenting with different forms of expression first. I think
Right.
like the definition of transitioning is actually very broad. It describes a lot of the personal identity stuff. It describes the sort of changing your name is very common for transgender people. It describes the way that you dress. It describes the way you perform. If you decide to perform a different gender first, and to me at least, from seeing and talking to a lot of people who I know that are trans, they go through these steps and it takes them years. It takes them years to think about themselves, to self-reflect, and to sort of ideate to create their own identity. And then at the very tail end of that, once they've gone through all of those steps of dressing differently, taking hormones, asking to be called by different pronouns, being called a different name, telling their families, their friends, everybody that they know that they identify as the gender that they want to, then that's when the surgery comes. And so to me, when I see people focus on the surgery and focus on the end of that and say, wow, this is really like dangerous, possibly, we don't know what's going to happen, it feels kind of redundant to me, because I feel like a lot of people who are getting that surgery and who are taking that step have already, they've gone through a gauntlet, really, of social acceptance, of social possibly unacceptance, people who can't come out to their families because they fear that they won't be accepted, or that they'll be rejected by them.
I think the other thing that I would want to change, if anything, is the whole stigmatizing on the other side of things, right? Like I would like to just call an end to the word transphobic or transphobia, and there's been like raising concerns about it. I think is completely legitimate. Is this like an experiment with humans?
Do you mean like calling someone transphobic as like an action is wrong?
Calling someone transphobic,
like that's the thing. It's like,
I think calling some, like the whole label calling, name calling, I think is terribly unhelpful, right? So like calling someone transphobic for saying like, hey, like what we used to call women is now supposedly, people with vulvas, right? Like, hey, can we just say men and women? And then like, no, we can't, you're transphobic, right? I think that's unhelpful.
Yeah, I think definitely
this is a conversation we need to have,
yeah,
and be able to have. And that's the most important to me, is that we can have conversations. And then similarly, there's been, I mentioned before, there's some guy that I forget his name, but supposedly has and this is completely like, I don't know the details of this, so I may be completely off mark here, but there's a guy who has a website about people who transition and either transition back or just regretted it, and like collecting people's stories, and he's being harassed or banned or whatever. I think that's an important piece as well to have out there and have open communication about this stuff. And I believe Tucker, I didn't see it, but I think Tucker had some lady on who was being banned or something, who had a book also about some of the negative side effects of transgenderism or transitioning. And like that stuff should be also applauded, right? Because we need to have, honest conversation about that.
Well, sure. Yeah. And, one thing that I would rather say, Calvin, as far as calling people transphobic, I think that that's probably a very bad generalization to do. I think it would be more accurate and probably more factually correct to say that somebody said something transphobic, right? Not to label the person, but to label what their actions are. Because to me, to say, someone said something transphobic, it's not necessarily a judgment of their character or to say that they're a bad person, but to say that they maybe said something that trans people might go like, hey, that makes me really uncomfortable and really afraid, and like it might not be that person said something wrong because they were being malicious or because they were like trying to hurt trans people, but their action did hurt trans people. And maybe it's it's about acknowledging that side of it as well. So having a word for that, I understand where your sort of apprehension is, to not want to judge people based on necessarily, if we don't want to necessarily judge people's words into necessarily, we don't want to assign all of this judgment on them, because definitely like if there's like the cancel culture is part of the culture war, right? There's this sort of social media thing that happens where if someone gets called a name or transphobic, racist, etc., that a lot of people kind of dogpile on them. Sometimes that's true that they did say a thing that was transphobic, racist, homophobic, etc., and sometimes it isn't. And either way, the mob,
I would say 100% of the times, putting the label, whether you put it on the person or on the thing they said, 100% of the times, the label's not helpful, right? You just be like, I disagree, or I think I think you're wrong.
Because like, who's going to be the authority of what's transphobic? Because you're talking about an action can be transphobic if it offends the trans community. But what if what you're saying is like factually true and that's still offensive? Then is it
Right. And we
Yeah,
like
well,
most people get up every day looking for something to be offended about, right? That's just human nature. It's just who
uh,
we are, right?
I personally disagree.
You do?
I don't think people necessarily. I think there's maybe some people who go out of their way to get offended about things, but I
I
mean,
think most people do, honestly. Like
yeah,
it's a rush.
be offended by the facts too, can't they?
Adrenaline rush. I don't know. Is it a dopamine rush, serotonin? I don't know what hormone it
I
is, but some fucking hormone that makes people like like. I mean, you can just tell like from most news stories, they're angled
Yeah,
in a
well, that's a
way
fair point.
to make people offended because people like that feeling. It makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel superior, right? It's a drug. It's a drug.
They like being offended because it justifies the way they think. Because being
Yeah.
offended means, yes, that person is the attacker and I am in the right.
Right.
Okay, so it's almost
Yeah.
like a victim complex.
Yes.
It is. Oh, for sure. Yeah. 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 Which is, I mean, so much of what's happening politically is just victimhood, right?
Oh, true.
And
That's
finding something.
definitely on both ends of the
It's
spectrum.
everywhere.
You
It's everywhere.
see
Yeah.
you see a lot of people, but then again, are there real victims in our society? Is that does that question have an answer?
There are
Right.
victims.
And does it matter? Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was going to say. There
I
are,
think it does, but that's,
Well,
my opinion.
to whom though? Right. Cause like, you know, if I'm victimized and then I'm like I define myself as a victim, I'm now doubly victimized, right? Like, but if I define myself as a creator and like, all right, I don't care what happened, this happened, that happened. What is it I want? What is it I can do? What action can I take
and it's
Maybe
to
not,
get
it's
there? Right.
yeah,
That
maybe
gives me
it's
the
black or
power.
white either. It's not black or white. People can be victims and have some power at the same time. And while it is true some people are victims, it's not useful to tell them that they're victims. That's the thing. That's like what we were talking about, free will. I don't believe we actually have free will, but it's useful to believe that you do because then you take more actions that are oriented towards what you want.
Yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase this as far as like I still think it's kind of like that's the thing is like maybe it's not useful to describe yourself as a victim because that's a pretty broad statement about yourself, but a victim of a specific action or event or a problem.
I like that.
So
There
give
are
me an example
victims.
where that's
Being able to
useful.
specify
A
it
victim
and
of sexual assault.
Right.
Someone who was sexually assaulted. This
I like
doesn't.
Right.
society.
They might not. Of course, they might not want to define themselves as. In fact, I think most people who, at least in this specific bucket, they don't want to define themselves as victims of sexual assault unless they've
Right.
gone through a sort of actualization of this idea and
Right. Yeah. So it's like it's helpful to know that happened. That's
Mhm.
super helpful, right? And then like, okay, this happened. Nothing that anybody can do is going to change that fact.
Mhm.
Now what do I want, right?
Right.
And we
And
can have sympathy, we can
that's the
have
next-
empathy and
Mhm.
compassion and everything else for the pain and the suffering and all of that.
Right.
We should be doing everything in our power to make them more independent, in my view, to make them more, to make them have more power. And not,
Well,
and not to just-
that was just an example, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on it as far as like what we should do with specific victims of specific actions. But like, there's like, I think it still is useful to define to have a factual statement that describes a thing that happened to you, right? And
Sure.
there are some victimhood buckets that are a little broader, right? For instance, one could describe themselves as a victim of racism in some way, and that bucket could be a little broader because some people are victims of racism in bigger ways than others, maybe. And as a white person, I can't speak very knowledgeably on that subject unless I were to study it for a good amount of time and because I've never experienced that myself.
So let's wrap up here. So closing thoughts on the culture war. Like, what have we learned, and what's the path forward here to unite the country?
I don't know. Have we really talked about that? I think,
Yeah, we kind of got off subject a little bit,
yeah,
but
we
I
might need to
think
go
what
more
we've
in
been
depth.
talking about is those things are part of the culture war. That they're part of this push and pull between these two ideas of what our society is like and what it should be like. And at the root of it, I believe there is a common ground. For instance, we agree that there should be more individual freedoms for people to express themselves in the ways that they want to. We agreed that we want to increase those freedoms for people and let people make choices for themselves in those ways.
Decrease
And
expectations.
in talking to each other and in hearing different viewpoints, we didn't go further one way or the other. We wanted to find that common ground, and we wanted to, figure out what those differences are so we can articulate them better in some ways. But we also want to make sure that, we are we want to create a society that in which people have things that they can agree on, right? And so I think that the culture war, I mean, obviously I don't think any of us are in extreme end of the culture war, right? We're all in different positions in different places, and that are they're I would say more towards the center of that spectrum. But like I think my takeaway from, my idea coming in is that the culture war is kind of something that is hyped up in our country. It's something that has been hyped up in the past 4 years, especially due to an increasingly divisive administration that has been putting through a lot of inflammatory rhetoric that has been putting a spotlight on these two extreme ends of the spectrum. And so a lot of us in America feel like those two ends are starting to dominate our political culture. In some ways they kind of are, but in other ways they're also not. And I think it's important, when thinking about the culture war, to remember those parts that are not in on those extreme ends, and to remember that we as Americans want the same things. We want safety for our families. We want everyone who we know to be healthy and happy, in whatever ways that means. And we want, our country as a whole to be a better place for people to live.
Okay. I think the solution is to be more, like what you said, just to be more specific about the things we're talking about the words we use. When we talk about things like homophobia, victims. We need to be more specific when we use those terms. We need to tell people like why we're using those terms. We need to question people whenever they use those terms so they can get a better understanding for themselves when they're using those terms. And then that way we get a better idea of the common needs we need to get met. And then that way you get people who have a better understanding of the other side. And then that way you get people who have a more objective perspective, as long as you are laying out more objective information in front of them. And that way, I think you can gradually simmer down the culture war.
Yeah, I think those are both very good points. I think the thing that I keep returning to is just not be so damn certain about everything, right? And that goes for everyone's like we think we know a lot of things about, culture and humans and how we function, and what makes us happy and what makes us healthy, and just having that willingness to question, to be like, I could be right, but I could also be wrong. I feel pretty right about this thing, but there's a chance that I'm wrong, right? Having that openness around this on both sides, I feel like is what can bring us into the conversation. Because if you're like, this is the way it is, and it absolutely is, and it's completely proven and scientific and beyond, like anybody who says science has proven as if then that makes it set in stone forever doesn't understand science, right? Science is constantly moving, and every time, like, it's, I have this phenomenal book called The Beginning of Infinity, David Deutsch, and he's like, they shouldn't call it Newton's general theory of I forget what that theory it was,
Newton's
but then like
laws. There's like
of
the Newton's
laws of
three
physics,
laws.
but yeah, it's like his theory anyway. And then Einstein's theory of relativity and stuff. All of it should be called Newton's misconceptions of physics and Einstein's misconceptions, because it's guaranteed that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we're going to have completely new, different explanations of these things. And it doesn't mean that what we used to think is completely wrong. It might, but it just means that we have a much better and deeper understanding, and it's constantly moving, right? It's constant. We're constantly learning more. So it's always shifting, it's always moving.
The problem with that is that people have like a sort of need for certainty because they want security.
That is correct.
And they need
Absolutely.
that to actually have a stable worldview and not be terrified of anything.
Because exactly, because the people think that they get safety from that certainty of belief versus from just being in the present moment with their present awareness, right? Which we've completely lost touch with. Like, my dog doesn't need fucking certainty of beliefs to be, enjoying an afternoon nap.
I would like to push back slightly, just to be, I guess, a devil's advocate for a second on the idea that people need certainty. I think that you can find some comfort in uncertainty. Of course, like, there's some amounts of uncertainty that you don't want, right? You don't want to wake up every morning and be completely uncertain about what you're going to do today. You don't want to be completely uncertain about, oh, if I walk down these stairs, am I going to fall? No, you want to have a good amount of certainty about, especially your regular routine and your daily life. But, I identify as an agnostic, meaning I don't have a certainty on whether or not there's a higher power. I think that there could be, and I think that there couldn't be, and I don't know. And I am comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the idea of not knowing, and with the idea that I will never know. And so,
I think, no, I get that. I think what Rayhan was saying was like in general, people feel a need for something, like some beliefs to hold on to. And it, again, like we talked about in the beginning, it threatens their sense of identity and who they are and their place in the world when their beliefs gets questioned.
What I was saying was that the fundamental need is security, to know that you're secure. And certainty is a part of that. Certainty leads to security. I don't think.
And then we really like it when there's some uncertainty and variety, right? Like Tony Robbins always makes this joke, like, our first human need is the need for certainty, and our second need is our need for uncertainty, right? We want something new and different to happen. Otherwise we just get bored, right? So there's always going to be that push and pull.
Certainly. Yeah. Well, it's been lovely talking to you guys.
Likewise,
I hope you all have a good evening. I'm going to go get some food.
Cool. Are you gonna join us next week? Because then we could talk about the gender thing in more detail.
Yeah.
Sure. I might come back with some more. I might post some more research on the Discord or something.
All right. Let's do that next Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern.
200.
Sure.
Fucking gender. Let's tackle the gender thing.
Yeah. Oh, that is Christmas Eve, isn't it?
Oh, fuck yeah. We're not gonna do it next Thursday because I have
2 weeks.
The house full of guests. So yeah, 2 weeks or maybe some other. Yeah. All right. Never mind. Not next Thursday. Well, 2 weeks would be New Year's Eve. So I'm going to have the house full of guests there too. So,
oh, wow.
I don't know. We're going to have to figure out when we can do this next, but this is fun. I really appreciate it, guys.
No, absolutely.
Thanks for showing up, Glenn, last minute. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Y'all have a lovely evening.
You too, man. All right. Goodbye, YouTubes. And goodbye, Rayhan, and see you next time.
On Saturday, right?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Bye.
Boom.